So as we've talked about from the National Activities Report, there are multiple approaches that are found to be beneficial, and sometimes these approaches can appear to be mutually exclusive. But it's really important that we look at them and look at what it is they're trying to do. So what are the variables they're looking at changing? What are their outcomes looking to, what are they looking for to get good outcomes? In other words, if it is a program that works, do we want what works with that? We need to make sure that our outcomes are functional and applied and make real life differences. There's lots of programs out there that teach tricks that are not generalized. They are only done in one setting. They're only done maybe with one person or one material. They are not done in a natural enough setting for the child to generalize the information. So really look at, yes, this program, it says this program works, but do I care? If I'm done and it's successful, does it add up to something that's meaningful? I can cite research for a myriad of intervention approaches and make a case for it. But if it's not functional and it doesn't fit the family and the child and even the school context, then it's no good to me, and it's certainly no good for the child. One thing that's really important to note in the literature is that children with autism, or ASD, are difficult to study in large experiments because they're not a homogeneous group. Remember, if you know one child with autism, you really just know one child with autism. And this same thing actually happened when we first started to study children with learning disabilities. Some of them had difficulty with auditory material, some of them had difficulty with visually presented material, some of them had difficulty integrating things, but we lumped them all together, and as long as they were labeled learning disabilities, we put them in studies. And what would happen is our outcomes would not show anything working because our children as a group were not homogeneous enough to study. I think the same is somewhat true in children with ASD. We need subtypes to help researchers really know, with this kind of learning style or this kind of presentation, these interventions work well. So we don't have that kind of guidance right now. So what we need is good professional judgment. You need to be well versed in what science is available and well experienced in what makes that fit, and use good professional judgment in that, and be as data driven as we can in those decisions. Some individuals always will benefit more than others in any type of treatment that you do, and this is true in other disabilities also. You can see children with mild hearing impairment who are struggling in school, and you can see children with moderate and even profound hearing impairment who are doing quite well. So one of the things that we have to know is that each individual will respond a little differently to what we're doing, and some of the reasons might be family stress levels. We know that when a family is in stress, that child does not do as well or react as well to interventions. The language levels that the child comes to us may indicate one form of treatment or another. We can't, if a child doesn't have a good symbol system, use a treatment or an intervention that really is driven by a symbol system, such as social stories. I would never use social stories on a child who doesn't have basic communication, because if they don't have that symbol system, what good is a social story going to do for them? Lovas indicated that individuals with IQs below 50 do not respond as well to intensive behavioral therapy. And I find that really interesting, don't you? If you look at Lovas's original studies, those children had quite high IQs. And if you look at what's being done now, people use Lovaas's discrete trial training, one, not at the young age that he recommended, and two, usually for those children who have very, very low measured IQs. So deciding what is appropriate treatment is a very, very complex idea and a very, very complex job for us as educators. So the developmental disability itself influences outcomes. So for instance, when we're thinking about the social pathways of a child with autism, their interest in objects, or their interest in over people, or their interest in non-speech sounds over speech sounds may interfere with social development. So the brain then doesn't develop pathways that interact socially with the world because they're not drawn to it, and those areas are not well developed. The other thing is that therapy may be seen as being beneficial when it is simply normal development or a reaction to something else. So we all know that children do learn and develop on their own. So we may think that a therapy is responsible for that when actually it's just growth and development. We also know that sensory characteristics change over time all on their own. Echolalia abates over time on its own. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Just it's the same as sensory characteristics. Stereotypical behavior also abates over time. So many of those things that we associate with the severity of autism do get better just by getting older. So we shouldn't confuse therapy with making that better when development is making that better. And how can we do that? By keeping good data about what we're doing and what's going on. We also know that individuals with ASD do not have a degenerative course. It is not a degenerative disorder, so they do get better with time and treatment regardless of the type of treatment. We do know that intensity of treatment matters. And guess what? IQ, measured IQ, is the strongest indicator. Why? Because at that point, if they're able to take an IQ test, they're good at behavioral switching, aren't they? They have good executive functioning, they're able to behaviorally switch, and they probably have better language skills. Studies that have only children on the higher end of the cognitive scale may be showing improvement that would have come with any intervention. So we have to be really careful how we view our scientific results. So the other thing that influences our scientific results is a non-random selection. So because children with autism used to be difficult to get a hold of because they weren't quite so easy to find earlier on, people would have a pool of necessity and convenience in order to get the subjects that they need, and that's changing now because unfortunately of the increase in the number of children with this disorder. There also may be biased pools. For instance, if I ran a study at the university and only advertised on the elevator in the university, then the people that I would get would probably have higher levels of education, may then have more access to intervention, may have lower stress levels, all of those things which would bias my outcomes. Sometimes their dependent variables are placement outcomes, and we really can't say that because I can place any child and say this is a fully included child in the general education classroom after this treatment, but we don't know how well they're functioning in that classroom. So I really am a little hesitant about placement outcome suspect. And also there is an automatic increase in IQ after school entry, which goes back to what we talked about IQ tests. Once children learn the behaviors that are necessary for testing, they test better. So consequently, whether or not they have a disability, children's IQ typically goes up after kindergarten because they have learned those kind of school testing behaviors. That's also, the reverse is also true. Those children who have been taught those kind of school testing behaviors at an early age tend to have a higher IQ early on because most of the children are not taught that. The placebo effect. We also have to be aware that anytime evaluators are aware of an intervention, they tend to view behavior more benignly. So, oh, well, that tantrum looked a little less than the one before because of all my efforts. So we have to be careful.